The National Unions of Metal Workers of South Africa has warned of looming strike action at the Gautrain if wage demands are not met. June 19th will mark 110 years since the 1913 Native Land Act was passed by the Union of South Africa. In the run-up to the South African AIDS conference being held in Durban this week, high-ranking healthcare leaders at institutions like UNAIDS have called for pressure on African governments to fully fund HIV/AIDS programs. Good afternoon. We're coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park in Johannesburg. Thank you for tuning in. You're watching The Week Ahead. You can interact with us on social media platforms. It's at The Week Ahead, and our hashtag is The Week Ahead. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabala. Let's start here this hour. The Democratic Alliance says it will be submitting urgent parliamentary questions to determine the full cost of the president's Ukraine-Russia trip, which it terms a shambolic political stunt. It says the questions to the presidency will also seek to obtain detailed breakdown of the 120-person entourage accompanying the president on this trip, as well as what this cost South Africans. For more on this, we're joined by the party's Emma Powell. She's MP and Shadow Minister for International Relations and Cooperation. Emma, good afternoon, and thank you very much for your time. Now, your party leader issued a statement yesterday on President Ramaphosa's trip and just overall participation in the Africa peace mission to Ukraine as well as Russia. You've indicated that you'll be submitting urgent parliamentary questions on, among others, that worrying Poland incident. Just take us through exactly what you're seeking answers on.
Hi, afternoon. Thanks for having me. So it's clear that over the past 2 days, the presidency has disgraced South Africa on the global stage, and that this so-called peace mission has been utterly shambolic. Not only did the presidency lie about being unaware of missile strikes in Kiev while the so-called peace mission was in town, but the administration's sheer incompetence ended up causing a plane load of bodyguards, journalists, and apparently unauthorized weapons to be denied entry into Poland. So the DA is now submitting a series of urgent parliamentary questions. We want to understand the full cost to the people of South Africa of this utterly shambolic political stunt. We have requested the full flight manifest. We've also submitted questions to the presidency to obtain a detailed breakdown of the security detail that was accompanying the president. We know that there were more than 120 personnel on board that plane, 10 of whom were journalists. We also want to understand where the presidency stands on allegations that were leveled at the Polish authority by his head of presidential security, Wally Roda, on racism essentially leveled at the Polish authorities. Because from what we understand and what's been reported in the news, it seems that the plane, in fact, didn't have authorization to enter the airspace of various countries, and that we understand that various dangerous and undeclared weapons may have also been on board this aircraft.
We understand that at this point, of course, details are still scant, and the presidency spokesperson has indicated that they will only respond to those urgent parliamentary questions once you've submitted them. But in that particular statement of yours from yesterday, you reduced the president's participation in those peace talks to a mere PR stunt, a statement that, of course, has left many divided. Why exactly do you view it as such?
Well, there are a number of questions around the involvement of certain international organizations in this, and I think that more will be communicated on that at a later point. The Polish authorities have told us via a media statement that, in fact, 3 meetings were held with the presidential's security operation teams ahead of the visit, and that all of the necessary requirements were communicated to to the South African authorities. We know that the presidential security teams, in fact, didn't have the relevant permits on hand. But going to the heart of the mission, which is essentially the objective of Ramaphosa and a number of other African leaders to try and broker some sort of fragile peace in the region,
yes.
We know from Zelensky's comments that essentially they will not accept anything other than a full withdrawal of Russian troops and not the ceasefire or the cessation of hostilities that Ramaphosa has been calling for. We know that that Zelensky has essentially at the press conference 2 days ago dismissed many of the objectives that Ramaphosa tried to broker. And we know that in St. Petersburg yesterday, Putin also dismissed out of hand the objectives. So essentially, the mission has now been rejected by both Zelensky and Putin. Mm-hmm. And questions are now rising in the mainstream media about whether or not there is an involvement of certain Russian-aligned organizations in having initiated this. I think that ultimately what President Ramaphosa has done is he's presented nothing of concrete value in terms of mediating the crisis. And this has ultimately been a PR stunt.
Mm-hmm. But what of those that say that that is perhaps a bit unfair, saying that you have leaders here that went into a war zone? We all know there was no ceasefire agreed upon just for the period of those talks. So you even had our own president, along with the others, sitting through a 15-hour train ride and actually using back routes to access these two countries. So wouldn't that be deemed a very dangerous PR stunt, if indeed that was the intention?
Well, I mean, our leader, John Steenhuisen, undertook the same trip last year on the same train ride with far fewer protection officers than what the presidency has. I mean, the presidency flew out a plane of 120 personnel that weren't ultimately even able to accompany him. But it's clear for all to see that this trip was designed to spin Ramaphosa and the ANC out of the trouble that they are in over South Africa's ongoing support for President Putin. And we've got a long list of indicators that demonstrate in vivid technicolor detail the links between the ANC and the Russian Federation. We've got Lady R, we've got the Russian freight aircraft that was allowed to land at the Waterkloof military base to so-called deliver a diplomatic bag. We've got General Mambata, who headed over to Russia in April to lead what we called, or what he termed, conflict and military readiness talks. In recent weeks, we've had our state security minister engaging with Russia. We hosted in South Africa military drills with Russia and China on the anniversary of the illegal invasion of Ukraine. And I think that this peace mission, the so-called peace mission, has been designed to try and paint South Africa as a credible mediator. But I think that that's very difficult to do when it's clear from all other indicators that South Africa has been actively engaging with the Russian Federation on military cooperation and strategy.
Mm-hmm. I want to...
So I think Ramaphosa's got very little credibility, to be perfectly honest.
Mm-hmm. I just want to take you back to that statement around your leader, John Steenhuisen, having embarked on a fact-finding mission to the Ukraine last year. You touch on it, so perhaps we can speak further on this. There were those that criticized the party, but your party leader maintained that in the era of fake news and propaganda, it was important for any individual to constantly assess the situation firsthand, to know exactly what's happening. Now, many would argue that the president embarked on a somewhat similar trip. It's not just to get the facts firsthand, but to also facilitate peace. So what are we missing here? Because when he was criticized, you of course defended him as a political party, and to some it would seem as though they were on a similar mission.
Well, I think that the facts tell a very different story. So our leader, John Steenhuisen, went to Ukraine with a very small group of people to go and understand for himself what was happening on the ground and to report back to the South African people and to our party and to our members what he observed in the nation. Conversely, we had the presidency arrive in Kiev on the same day that Russia carried out missile strikes on the city. We know that a number of people were injured. The missile strikes strikes were conducted in the Podol region. And the president's spokesperson immediately took to Twitter and to the airwaves to say he didn't witness any air raid sirens. He didn't think that it had happened. He essentially denied that there had been missile strikes. And one has to question whether or not Reuters journalists and people on the ground and eyewitness accounts are truthful, or whether or not the president's spokesperson is telling the truth. Mm-hmm. So I think that initially brought into question the veracity of the presidency's claims that they are in fact neutral, this overt denial on the first day that they landed in Ukraine, whereas our leader went there, he communicated from the ground, and he saw for himself. He didn't deny the reality of the Ukrainian people and their suffering under Russian imperialism. In terms of the brokered agreement or the attempted mediation agreement that Ramaphosa and his colleagues from the continent have gone to broker, very little details have been provided to the public on the contents of that proposed mediation agreement, whether, for example, Ramaphosa has requested of the Russian Federation that they withdraw their troops, or whether or not he's simply requesting a ceasefire, which would not, of course, be acceptable to the Ukrainian people. We don't understand what the details are in respect of already annexed territory, such as Crimea. And so from the information that's coming out from media streams and from the presidency itself in respect to what's going on, it's been little other than sort of hot air. We saw President Ramaphosa standing alongside Vladimir Putin yesterday, and Putin had dismissed out of hand already some of Ramaphosa's proposals. And the day before, we had seen Ramaphosa standing alongside Zelensky, rambling somewhat incoherently about...
But even there, even with President Zelensky, he dismissed some of their proposals, particularly that of negotiating at this point. We all know what he stated. He said he's lost faith, essentially, in any negotiation process. But he's somewhat of the view that mounting a strong counteroffensive or convincing other nations to isolate Putin will eventually end the war. Now, that particular posture, is that something the DA perhaps believe in as well, that there's no longer a place for negotiation at this stage of the war?
Well, the Ukrainian president has made it very clear that mediation can only begin once Russia has withdrawn their troops. Let's say, for example, that there's a ceasefire, but Russian troops remain in Ukraine and Ukrainian territory remains annexed by Russia. Let's say that there is then some kind of a mediated settlement that's negotiated. The fact is that Ukraine is still subject to the diktat of the Kremlin while the Kremlin's troops remain in Ukraine. And you cannot enter into long-term negotiations towards lasting peace while the troops and the military operatives of a foreign government remain stationed in your country. And I think Zelensky has made it very clear that he is open. He has tabled the Zelensky peace plan. It has solicited wide support from Western nations, and we know that he spoke to that at the latest G7 summit. And the key criteria of President Zelensky is we can negotiate as soon as Russia withdraws their troops. And I heard a commentator on another news channel make a very poignant example. He said it's like negotiating with burglars who have entered your house to say, okay, well, we need to negotiate a peaceful way out of this situation. So you can keep the TV, but I want the Wi-Fi system. And just make sure that, we'll broker while you're standing on my balcony. No. You need to withdraw from the property. It's the same it's a very basic example, but that's what Zelensky's saying. You don't negotiate with terrorists who remain in your nation and expect lasting peace to arise from such negotiations. And that's why we as the South African people, we as the Democratic Alliance have been asking the presidency, we've been asking government to say, what are the terms and conditions of this so-called peace mission? What is it that you are asking Zelensky to agree to? And what is it that you are asking Putin to agree to? To date, we've got very little information. other than the fact that Ramaphosa is calling for a ceasefire. A ceasefire is simply not good enough. Russian troops need to withdraw from Ukraine, and negotiations in terms of the future of the relations between those two countries can be negotiated from that point onwards.
Just in closing, I'm sure you heard President Putin yesterday when they brought some of the proposals to the table. It seemed that he wanted to take them to the genesis of this conflict here. And again, he always points to the West, that you've got the USA and you've got the EU that has continued to threaten their security. So clearly it's a very complex issue here, where both would speak of the genesis being completely different. So it's one's view and another's view. So as the Democratic Alliance, would you not be of the view that perhaps we need the US as well as the EU at this negotiation or mediation table, that, yeah, if indeed, as some have said, it's a proxy war, then perhaps you need these superpowers to be at the negotiating table as well?
Well, absolutely. And the genesis of this conflict is complex, and it essentially stems back to what happened in 2014 with Crimea. But the point remains that, and I think that this is key, Ukraine is a sovereign state. Now, Russia has sort of dog-whistled to the expansion of Western powers via NATO. And essentially that it has been Ukraine's flirtation with potentially joining NATO that has engendered this invasion. Now, as a sovereign nation, and in terms of the United Nations Charter, Ukraine is absolutely has full rights to decide which international organizations they will and will not join. And the potential membership of NATO did not arise as a national question until what happened in Crimea in 2014 took place. And it then became a question of Ukraine obtaining guarantees from its neighbors and from Western nations that they would be protected in the event of further Russian imperialist expansion into the country. And I think that the Kremlin have used that as a fig leaf in terms of justifying their invasion of Ukraine last year, to say that in fact they're protecting their country and their territorial sort of space from further Western expansion. And so what we are seeing here absolutely is the reemergence of the same bipolarity between Russia and Russian imperialism and the West. And I think that there is absolutely a space for the Western countries to sit down at the negotiating table and to start tracking a path towards fragile peace in the region. But it goes back to my earlier statement that Zelensky and the Ukrainian people have been clear that no such negotiations towards the future security of the region or Ukraine's potential membership of NATO will be entertained while Russian troops remain in Ukraine. And I think that we need to be very circumspect in terms of what we believe that is coming out of Russia via news sources like Russia Today. We know that the Russian Federation has a huge propaganda machine. We know that there's a lot of censorship that goes on in that nation. And I think that there are significant questions that need to be asked and mediated with a view to long-term peace and sustainability in the region. But as I say, that's not going to happen until Russia withdraws. And that's what Zelensky told President Ramaphosa at the meeting on Thursday.
Ms. Powell, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That was Emma Powell. She's a DAMP, the Shadow Minister for International Relations and Cooperation. More news after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, the HIV community will come together under the same roof post the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. Now, this is to deliberate on the next steps towards an AIDS-free generation come 2030. The 11th SA-AIDS conference will take place at the Durban International Centre from Tuesday. This year's event will be held under the theme Act, Connect and End the Epidemic. For more on this, we're joined by Dr. Kensani Nkwashu, the Executive Manager at SANEC. Good afternoon and thank you very much for your time, Doctor. Now, this is the 11th conference. This year it's under the theme Act, Connect and End the Epidemic. Just take us through this theme.
Well, good afternoon and also good afternoon to all the listeners. As you have highlighted that ever since, the HIV community, we met in 2019, there were no platform where we met again as South Africans to look through and pave the way forward for the 2030 agenda. Hence, the theme of the conference is called Act, Connect to End the Epidemic by 2030. Thank you.
Now, that goal of an AIDS-free generation by 2030, it's in 6.5 years. Can this goal honestly be achieved so soon? Because at this point, we're still seeing a lot of misinformation, or perhaps a sheer lack of information on concepts such as U equals U, post and pre-exposure prophylaxis. I mean, people are always surprised on social media to hear there's some sort of medication to prevent one from contracting AIDS. So how possible is it to achieve this goal at this point?
As we know as South Africans, that this goal is possible. However, we can only achieve this goal together if we bring all our thoughts together and we all commit to working together. And also at the same time, we commit resources. Because as you are highlighting that currently what we are seeing, each and every individual is working in their own little corner. So hence, at this particular gathering where we are going to Durban, for the whole week, it's a good platform for all South Africans, academics, people who are working at the community level, the implementers, the clinicians, everyone who's working on HIV, that we meet together. We agree on all the actions that needs to be implemented before we reach 2030. And as you are highlighting, definitely we are not far. However, if we go according to the way that currently we are going, there is no way that will meet this agenda. But we need to unite and put all our resources together and focus, using the National Strategic Plan that has just recently been launched, that paves a way for all of us, that anyone who's working on the HIV field, TB field and STI field in South Africa, that remains being the Bible that we're going to use to implement it. However, the key word here is unity and working together.
And for those who want to be part of the conference, is it possible for them to join remotely, particularly ordinary citizens who want to hear more on these concepts such as the U equals U?
Yes, there will be links, that will be communicated during the course of the conference, especially for those sessions that we want the communities to join. And as you are highlighting, the big one being the U equals to U, that, if you take your treatment, you adhere to it, definitely you will not be able to transmit HIV, AIDS to your partner or also to when you give birth. That one is a key one, that if we move with it, as a country, especially for those who are already on treatment, and especially for those who have partners who are already HIV positive, that because you're going to act, you work together as partners to ensure that U equals to U remain being a realistic, and it's something that benefit all of us. Definitely, if such platforms and, such opportunities are presented during the conference, it's something that will be able to communicate through the media and through social media.
We await all those links because it's important to debunk some of these myths around HIV if we really are indeed to achieve that goal by 2030. But now to COVID restrictions. We all know to a certain extent it chipped away at the gains made in the HIV and TB response. But to what extent? Can you just give us a sense of this? How much of the gains did you lose during that period?
We actually lost a lot of gains. Let me say almost 40% of the gains that we had on the HIV programs, we lost it because we also lost a big opportunity during those restrictions that especially our mobile communities, they were not able to go out and do the testing. We were not able to put new people on treatment who were identified as HIV positive, unless if you have walked into the facility at that time, definitely requiring a service. However, there was no testing that was intensified during that time. So we really lost because in South Africa, we've got at least a gap of plus or minus 2 million of people who are walking out there in the street who don't know their HIV status. And those are the people that we need to identify and we put on treatment and ensure that they adhere on treatment. Hence, we are talking about U equals to U. And also looking at those gains, that not forgetting that we cannot talk about HIV at the same time without talking about TB. That at that time, yes, we're most focusing on screening, for COVID and not focusing that much on screening for TB. Hence, we lost. Looking at it, it's that we are losing almost 60,000 or 70,000 people here in South Africa to TB. And the core infection of those who are HIV positive and also HIV, TB positive. It's standing at plus or minus 60%. Hence, we lost a lot at that time. Remember, that's why we extended the National Strategic Plan to say that let it start in 2023 and not necessarily starting in 2022, so that we can catch up, on those losses that we had for a year. However, even today, we are still reeling, from that time that we have lost, because the year that we have extended with, we've realized that it was not enough.
Dr. Kensani, though, all the best with the conference. On our part, at the very least, we'll try to bring publicity to this all-important conference when it does indeed get underway. Thank you very much for your time. That was Dr. Kensani Ngwashu, the Executive Manager at SANEC. Well, we continue with the week ahead after this break. Do stay with us.
Ngicela ukwenza igadini at the age of 7 years. Ngihamba nobaba ngoba bekumuntu bekayenza igadini angibonisa ngisasemncane, then ngavela ngakubamba lokho ngayenza sure ukuthi kuzoba into ezonginceda empilweni until manje ngifunde ngaze ngaceda isikolo ngayona le mali egadini. Nayo igadini le ngiyenzayo iyebonakala isinceda ukuthi kukwazi ukutholakala ukudla endlini njengentsha. Singabuyeli emuva, masibhekeni phambili. Yonke into esiyenzayo sibambelele, singabheki izinto zomhlaba. Ayikho imisebenzi njengoba mina bese ngithi ngiyenza igarden, nginenhlanhla kakhulu ngoba mangakwazi ukuthola umsebenzi ngiyakwazi ukuchubeka ngizenzele into yami, ngoba kwesinye isikhathi ngiyakwazi nokuthi ngithola amajarida amaningi ngiphinde ngithathe kubo bona labantwana abahleli emalokishini ngithi bangincedise nabo bakwazi ukufaka isinkwa emzini yakubo. Babisa bonke Noah wabakhelinga nawe wathi imvuli yeza ongena Noah wababi.
Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa has warned of a looming strike action at the Gautrain if wage demands are not met. The union is demanding an 8% across-the-board increase from Gautrain management as part of the Bombela operating company. The demands also include an increase in housing, transport, night shift and medical aid contributions, as well as no retrenchments. NUMSA says it's most concerned about the company's intention to abolish the staff cards that allow workers to ride the Gautrain for free when travelling for work. The trade union says it has been issued with a strike certificate, but has requested a meeting with management in the hope of averting a strike. All right, let's take you to this story now. Escaped murderer and rapist Thabo Bester will on Tuesday appear in the Bloemfontein Magistrate Court alongside his partner, Dr. Nandipha Makutumane, and 7 others. The charges range from assisting a convicted criminal to escape from custody, tampering with a corpse, fraud and defeating the ends of justice. Bester escaped from the Mangaung Correctional Centre in May of last year through what is believed to be an aided escape. Among the accused are former employees of G4S who are alleged to have assisted in the escape plot that involved a staged suicide. Aphumelele Mdlalane, SABC News reporter, joins us now to take a look at what is likely to take place this Tuesday. Aphumelele, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. What exactly are we expecting at Tuesday's appearance?
Well, thank you and good afternoon. What is expected on Tuesday? We know that 9 accused in this matter will be appearing at the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court. That includes Thabo Bester. We must remember that on his last appearance last time, he appeared virtually from Hosimaburu prison. And we heard from his lawyer saying that in the next appearance, they would rather request that he appears in person so that there can be a direct consultation, as they were saying that they're having it very difficult to be of course, in communication with Thabo Bester, but also we are expecting Dr. Nandipha Magudumana to be one of the accused that will be appearing. And we must remember that Dr. Nandipha Magudumana tried to, of course, appeal her detention at the Kroonstad prison at the High Court in Bloemfontein. We know that now her application was overturned, and we know that she has filed papers to also try to the upper court. But the last person to have been arrested in this matter, we know that it is a 31-year-old Zimbabwean national, Zanda Moyo, whereby we saw on the charge sheet that he is linked to this matter. He had a relationship or was working together with Dr. Nandipha Magudumana in claiming one of the bodies at the National Hospital mortuary here in Bloemfontein. We know that this case has been reporting about 3 bodies that were claimed unlawfully so by Dr. Nandipha Magudumana. So he's one of the 9 that will be appearing, and we know that in his last appearance, he didn't have even a legal representative. And that appearance was not of him wanting to seek for bail application because it was the first appearance. But come Tuesday, this is where we will also get to hear from Dr. Nandipha Magudumana's legal representative as to whether now, since she has suspended her bail application, whether now she will exercise her right to apply for bail. We must remember in this case, we have 2 people that are outside on bail. That is Natasha Jansen, as well as Dr. Nandipha Magudumana's father, who is Zodile Sekeleni.
I just want to take you back to that aspect of Thabo Bester possibly appearing in person this time around. There was a bit of a squabble, I remember, on that 16th of May, where his legal representative had actually taken exception to the fact that he wasn't physically present, and he felt that he wasn't notified that Thabo Bester would be appearing on Zoom, which in fact speaks to his Section 35, subsection 3 rights here to a fair trial where they must consult if they so wish. Just remind us there, what was that squabble? What exactly did the legal rep go on to state in court?
Well, what really transpired in court is that the legal representative was somehow not happy with the decision that was taken. We must remember that there's always been reports that he appeared virtually because of security reasons. We know that he would have to be transported all the way from Hosimamboro prison to Free State to appear at the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court. However, on the side of his legal representative, that's where he stated that it can't be possible, it's not even practical, that he represents someone who appears virtually, because there was even a technical glitch. There was communication, instability between the two, because technology, network here and there, it was rather hindering the communication that was happening inside court, whereby we also heard from the magistrate asking many times from Thabo Bester's side whether he can hear the proceedings that were happening at the Bloemfontein Magistrates Court. That's where he could say, he was saying that here and there he is hearing, but it's not clear as he would hear enough when he was afforded the time to come and be one of the accused that are appearing, other than him being appearing virtually.
And then on the legal representative, Thabo Bester's legal representative, much has been made of his own legal issues, something that he has gone on to state really has no bearing on what's happening in court now insofar as Thabo Bester's case is concerned. But what exactly do we know about his case? Because we know that just after Tuesday, he will be appearing on the Wednesday.
There's so much that is happening, must indicate in this case, and we know that from the state side, they said that they can't rule out that more arrests are imminent in this matter. Like I did indicate that the last to be arrested was last week Sunday in Johannesburg. And that's where now we also saw from Thabo Bester's side, whereby he was changing legal representatives, and my colleague Criselda Louis tried to talk to the legal representatives of Thabo Bester just to understand whether is it because of financial complications, or maybe there's communication barrier here and there. But it remains to be seen as to who are we going to see in court now representing Thabo Bester. And we know this is still at an early stage to say as to which direction is this case taking, because we know that that the accused mainly that are involved in this case have been rather exercising their right in applying for bail, of which we know that it was, of course, dismissed for many of the accused, because we heard that they would tamper with the evidence and they would be threats to, or rather even intimidate the state witnesses. And it's been said many times where we saw also the state, the state as well as the legal representative saying that this case is a highly profiled case, and we expecting that come trial time, this case should have been rather moved to the High Court, where now we will see when things take turns. But for now, we're just seeing more arrests being made on this matter, because it's many people that have been involved. We saw the charge sheet as to the accused, the monies that they received from the TK Nkwana, who is now has been said to be a Thabo Bester. So there's just so much investigation that continues, and we are, of course, expecting more arrests to be made, taking from what the NPA or the state has been saying regarding this matter.
Aphumelele, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That was Aphumelele Mdlalane, SABC News reporter, just talking to us about that particular case that has gripped society. More news on the other side. Don't go nowhere. Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa has warned of a looming strike action at the Gautrain if wage demands are not met. Let's now bring in Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, she's NUMSA's spokesperson, for a chat on what impact this looming strike could possibly have on just the transportation ecosystem. Phakamile, thank you very much for joining us on the week ahead. We understand negotiations are at an impasse. Just talk us through the issue or the issues that have brought you to this point.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your viewers, and thank you so much, Mfundo, for having me on the show. Yes, we unfortunately have deadlocked with the management of Gautrain. We were currently engaged in wage talks. We were renegotiating a new collective agreement to govern our relationship for the next year. And unfortunately, we have reached an impasse where we now find ourselves headed towards a strike, because we can't agree on one core issue. And so for us as a trade union, we really are trying to do everything in our power to avoid this deadlock that we find ourselves in. But as things stand right now, it does seem that we are headed towards strike action at Gautrain if we're not able to find each other.
Talk to us about this core issue and the other issues that, or at least in detail, the other issues as well.
So we have actually found each other with the employer in terms of the wage demand. We agree on an 8% wage increase.
All right.
But the one issue that really has sparked a major problem amongst our members is the decision taken by Gautrain management to abolish the staff cards. The staff cards are basically cards that are used by workers at Gautrain for them to actually use the Gautrain to and from work. And the Gautrain management is now saying that workers must pay to use Gautrain in order to get to and from work. Our members are rejecting this. Gautrain is not cheap. It's not a cheap form of transport. And now that workers are expected to fork out money to use this transport, that is creating a major problem. And I mean, I think you have to see it from the perspective of the fact that our members are people who use the Gautrain. It's their tool of work. They are maintenance people, they are train drivers, some of them. So it really doesn't make sense that Gautrain should be expecting the very same people who are actually maintaining the train to then pay to use the train in order to get to work.
What were the reasons put forward by management? Were there perhaps allegations that when some are not on duty, they pass on their card to family members? Or what exactly did they say were the reasons to do away with this pass card?
Well, it just seems to be part of the cost-cutting measures that the organization is embarking on. And we find that completely unreasonable. Transportation in this country is not cheap. It's not reliable. And given that the work that our members do is actually to ensure a well-maintaining Gautrain, it's bizarre, actually, that management would come up with this proposal. So it really has become a sticking point. Our members are saying that there is absolutely no way that we can sign any agreement if that agreement includes that they must pay for their rides to and from work. This benefit of them using the staff card has been in place since 2013. And so it's really going to be a problem. What is exacerbating the situation is also that fact that Gautrain management also wants to abolish the housing allowance. Housing allowance actually allows our members to be able to access housing and to gain access to home loans. And if they abolish this housing allowance, it's just going to deepen the financial strain that is already on workers. So if you already are not able to use the staff card, now, like some of our members work far, they actually live in Pretoria, but they are required to work perhaps in a Gautrain station, which would be in Johannesburg. So now you've not only taken away the housing allowance, you've now made it even more expensive to travel. You're creating an impossible situation for workers at Gautrain. And this is really the burning issue at the moment. So we are calling on Gautrain management to come back to the table so that we can find each other on these two core issues.
Is there in fact a set date for you guys to start or restart negotiations?
On the 28th of June, we will be balloting our members around a strike. And we have organized and requested a meeting with Gautrain management on the 28th of June. We hope that they will respond to our request to meet. We do think that we don't have to resort to strike action. We would prefer to, find each other. NUMSA is the largest trade union in Gautrain. So if we were to go on strike, it would have a major, major impact on Gautrain operations.
Phakamile, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's NUMSA spokesperson Phakamile Shubi Machola. To the story now, June 19th marks 110 years since the 1913 Natives Land Act was passed by the then Union of South Africa. It prohibited natives from owning, leasing, or acquiring land. The act was repealed in June 1999. SABC's Mercedes Percent recaptures how dispossession happened and how far the land question has been addressed in democratic South Africa, as well as the legacy of the infamous legislation.
The passing of the 1930 Natives Land Act marked the formal dispossession of land in South Africa. Sol Plaatje, founder of the then African Natives Congress, unsuccessfully challenged the British government to scrap the legislation a year after the act became law. When apartheid was enacted in 1948, land dispossession continued. Residents of District 6 in Cape Town were some of the casualties of forced removals.
On 11 February 1966, District 6 was declared a white group area. And that essentially meant that District 6 was declared white and all black people had to leave the city. About 60,000 people were forced to leave. What you see behind me is really the images that people from District 6 took as the area was being demolished. So it's images of young high school students who would go to school and on the way would take photographs of the buildings that would be demolished around them.
What do you call this?
So we call this a memory box. It really depicts the stories of people who lived in District 6. And the two stories you see depicted in these boxes belong to Yasmina Saleh and Farinaz Gilfallen, both who lived and grew up in District 6. The museum works with people's memories. They share how life was like in District 6 and why it was important to them. And a memory box is just a way of capturing all that information.
This is the house of Zubeida Hendricks, a 100-year-old District 6 beneficiary under government's restitution program. Her daughter Zahra says her mother almost gave up after struggling for many years to claim back what was dispossessed from her. She had to take up the fight for her mother.
Practically every week I was at the land claims office to come and inquire about her claim. And she was given the key in 2013. And then she was very, very happy to move back to District 6. That was her wish, to come back to District 6. She is today 100 years old. Next month, she will be 101. And she is still in District 6. She is actually the oldest community member in the area.
Zahra, who's also chairing the District 6 committee, says the slow progress in the resettling many of the claimants remains a concern.
The process is very, very slow. There is still 975 units that National needs to build for the early claimants. Then the District 6 Working Committee has 3,000 late claimants. The District 6 Working Committee took government to court because of the slow process, and we won the court case. And that is why there is progress now of claimants moving back to District 6.
For some of the youth of District 6, they want to see more resettling and reintegration in the area.
Possibly to let all of the original, or not the original, but the people who lived in District 6 before, the previous people who lived here in the old District 6 before they bulldozed it. So I would like to see that people coming back to live here again and to claim their land.
They could at least make a change, because as you can see over there on that side behind the mosque there's a squatter camp, and there's a squatter camp over there. So if they can at least just give the people proper houses instead of putting tents up in it, because I don't like seeing people like that. For me it's how can I say, it's heartbreaking to see people like that, because no one deserves to live like that. Everyone deserves to be treated equally.
From District 6 to Zwezwe informal settlement near Danun along the N7. Here, people just want to get a proper piece of land and decent housing.
It's not healthy, to be honest, because I think this land is not enough. Because these were graves, but we are building houses here because we got no place to stay. We don't have money for rent. So this area is just sucks. It's not good for our people. We've got kids, and there is a farm here, but even people are staying here in this area. So it's not right at all.
If we can stand in unity and if we can stand as one, I'm definitely sure that we will be able to bring the land back to where it should be.
How will that be done?
Firstly, government. Secondly, is making the correct decisions. And thirdly, the biggest problem we have, and we all know it, is corruption.
As they say, this is an informal settlement. We just want the temporal housing here, so that we can stay at a safe place. Even our children, when they are about to go to school, they can't, because it's raining. The transport can't go in when it's raining to take the children to school. The transport won't come in because it's raining. As you see, there are the dams all over, so the road is not good at all.
Although Zwezwe is a wetland area, not suitable for habitation and without water and sanitation, some of its residents have become creative. This is Zuko Kalipa, preparing this rubbish dump section to use for food security.
I try here to making leaven for garden. I'm gonna plant spinach and onion and other stuff. I'm gonna take that stuff, onion, to support the people here. We have Krish here as well.
But that is rubbish that you have to do. So you're creating, because that is rubbish that is there. Are you now creating a land to plant?
Yes, but I have compost. You see there. It's a compost. After finished to making leaven, I'm gonna put compost, also sand.
So when do you think you're gonna start planting?
I'm gonna start this month because you're supposed to make leaven there. I'm gonna start in this month.
The Land and Accountability Research Center at the University of Cape Town reflects on the lack of progress in addressing the land question 110 years later and in a democracy.
So looking back, I think the progress has unfortunately been quite slow, especially in the last 30 years. Despite the constitutional commitment to land reform and the fact that a land reform program is laid out in the Constitution, it consists of 3 steps. One is to secure the tenure of people. One is to redistribute the land, which is about changing the nature of ownership and who holds land in South Africa. And the third part, of course, is restitution, which is returning land to people who are dispossessed. All 3 of those programs have really struggled to make an impact in changing the scape, the landscape, the picture of land ownership and the strength of land rights in South Africa.
Some of those who are the hardest hit by the slow progress of land reform and restitution are in the former homelands.
For communities in the former homelands, it's been a particularly slow process because they've had to work harder, because customary law, of course, also has to try and catch up with a common law system that has been the dominant format and framework for land rights for, hundreds of years. And so even though we are not in the same position as we were when the 1913 Land Act was passed, I would say that despite 100 years having passed, progress has been very slow.
The debate on land ownership continues to be a thorny issue for some. The PAC is one of the parties that has been at the forefront of the land debate. It says land ownership remains skewed since colonialism, and this has not changed.
110 years, 13 years, whatever, we are still where we were in 1913 or 1652. 29 years in the so-called democracy, it is worse. We are still, I don't even think we are still holding unto 13%. I think we're at 8% now. Every land has been taken by white people. Even our own government could not just address the land question. So there's nothing about 1913 that has changed. The land still remains in the hands of the white people.
But another party, the FF Plus, has always disputed the patterns of land ownership in South Africa.
The statement to say 87% of land was owned by whites is not correct. We must, the moment we talk about hectares, we must realize, if you go, for instance, to the Karoo, if you have a farm there less than 10,000 hectares, you cannot farm, you can't do anything with the land, it's not productive. So that is not a correct way to see land reform. In fact, there is statistics that is actually shown that if you take urban land and you include it, then you will find that about between 66 and 70% of land is actually occupied by black people. But yes, the government doesn't want to give them title deeds. So that's the problem.
As the debate over the legacy of the Land Act rages on, the UDM has rejected the expropriation bill for not making provision for the restoration of land stolen before 1913.
All right, and that's where we leave it for today. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers in the country. We're back next weekend. Do take care.